How moving it is to hear Thomas Berry's voice responding to Brian Swimme's probing questions in this audio titled Psychic Energy for the Great Work. After listening, I'm immediately struck by the double implication in Thomas's use of psychic, namely both cognitive and somatic, that is, mental and bodily dimensions of this great work in our times. What is it that Thomas is calling for in his opening references to religion and history as a human venture in cosmological terms that require renewal of psychic energies? He understands religions in their historical appearances as transmitting powerful dynamic energies of commitment by means of profound symbols. These symbols, he suggests, brought deeper cosmological orientations grounding human-Earth interactions. In this recording, he mentions Chinese cosmological symbols associated with seasons, as well as the spontaneous symbol-making energies of childhood and the heroic journeys celebrated by cultures around the planet. These all continue, he suggests, and are necessary for our contemporary challenges, but our times, according to Thomas, require new psychic energies. Our moment calls us to integrate meaningful action and awareness of our deep connections to evolutionary processes in the cosmos and in Earth. How moving to hear Thomas speak again about our human primordial sensitivity to the universe, gazing at stars, feeling the winds flow, sensing the excitement of plants celebrating their growth. These experiences arise in the human and align us to cosmological energies transmitted in the creative processes of evolution. How could we have been separated from these moments of grace when we experience the universe in ways that forever change our interior life and our outward behavior? Brian Swimme's questions bring Thomas's insight into sharp focus on how we humans dimmed down our capacity for seeing the whole universe in each particular natural expression. Citing his own life experiences, Thomas explores the life-altering dimensions of our modern industrial technological mindsets and colonizing worldviews that plunder our planet. Thomas calls for a new heroic vision, a new story, arising from a felt need for deep transformation. This call comes to us even as we are dimly aware of the magnitude of the change needed. We struggle to understand the story of our age. Thomas recalls how Teilhard de Chardin's thought helped him at a crucial juncture in realizing the psychic spiritual dimensions of the universe from the beginning. How Teilhard's insights into the universe and human as a single story brought Thomas out of a redemptive religious mode into a sense of sacred energies in the creative process of the cosmos and the earth community. Our moment of grace calls us now to move from pathological practices that distort and destroy to integrating behaviors that acknowledge and implement the deeply cooperative energies of life within and around us. This is where Thomas sensed profound energies waiting to assist us in our great work.
If you have a small task, it just takes a little amount of energy to complete it. But if you have a vast task, like the creation of an Ecozoic era, which is on the order of a planetary task, it seems to me you would need the activation of an energy that's just as vast, just as deep. And so I think this question of activation of psychic energy is just extremely important, and I think many people would love to hear you reflect on that.
Well, what we're about is something that traditionally has been evoked by the great religious movements of history. This we might consider as a meta-religious dynamic. That is, the The task itself is beyond what any single religion seems to be able to evoke. And this task itself of fulfillment of the universe has a profound religious dimension, but not exactly as we've known religions in the past. It's just like economics. We need an economy that we've never known in the past. We need an education that we've never known in the past. So we need a dynamic of history that we've never known in the past. And this is a continuation of the millennial vision of the Western world. It's a continuation of the dynamics of people everywhere, where they have interpreted the human venture in cosmological terms. In the Chinese world, the emperor had as his primary role the coordination of human affairs with the cosmological order. And the only thing the emperor had to do was to sit on the throne and face south. And the whole universe functioned, the human in harmony with the heavens. And of course, this was locked into the cycle of the seasons for planting and harvesting. It was locked into the solstice celebrations, the equinox transitions in the cosmological order. So the human was always interpreted in its cosmological context, so that it participated in the energy of the universe. We have to learn to be dynamized by the energy of the evolutionary process, that is, of an emergent universe going through a sequence of irreversible transformation episodes. We are at one of those episodes at the present time. And the future is not something that we create. The future is something that is created by the universe, particularly in its form of the planet Earth. So it's a question of the universe and all the components of the universe entering into this new phase. But in this new phase, the human has a special role because the human has brought about this phase. The human has been the principal instrument in terminating a former phase and will have an essential role in renewing the total course of Earth development. Now, as regards the sources of energy, a person might say that the source of energy is, where's the child get the source of energy when you see a child of 5-year-old, 6, 7-year-old who's taken out for an outing, and you see a child just running across the field. See a child just excited by where the child is, just the exuberance of being there draws the energy, the physical energy and the psychic attention and the fulfillment that the child experiences. Well, that is a primordial human response to the universe about us. We are in danger of losing that sensitivity to the universe, so that what is needed is to experience this in its evolutionary phase. Formerly, this was in the ever-renewing seasonal sequence of transformations. We need to appreciate these moments of grace as experienced in the moments of transformation, of evolutionary transformation that have taken place from the very first flaring forth of the universe. The formation of the galaxies was one of the central moments when the basic laws of the physical universe were set in order. And what happened then was extremely important in terms of the later development of life, the later development of consciousness. There's a direct influence and determination that was taking place there that made it possible for all these later things to happen. So what is important is that we become familiar with and identified with this emergent time developmental process that we refer to as evolution, the sequence of changes. So we have to reach back into the cosmological order and learn to set up conditions in which these dynamics can function, because at the present time we can, to a certain extent, block some of these creative forces of the universe, or we can assist in making them efficacious. So the future energy that we will need must be our excitement with the universe and our capacity to celebrate. I interpret the universe as primarily a celebration. The birds sing, the flowers bloom, the fish swim, the trees grow, the bees gather honey, the butterflies pollinate, and the whole process is a celebratory process. So what I would suggest is that it's this type of excitement that's needed to ally physical and psychic human energy with the energies of the universe, and consider this as a special moment of grace, because transformation moments are considered moments of grace. What's a moment of grace? It's a period when a special creative process takes place that so transforms the universe that it's never the same again. Such a moment was the discovery of photosynthesis, when one form of life developed that could take the energy of the sun and the inanimate substances of Earth and create organic matter. That I would consider a moment of grace. Now, another moment of grace would be the coming of the flowers. The development of the higher forms of mammalian life depended on the food supply and the concentrated proteins that came from the flowering plants and grasses. So this moment when flowers first appeared is something. Right now we gather flowers in the springtime. We're excited by the springtime renewal of flowers. But just think of a time when there was only greenery, the great fern growths that occupied the planet. And then colors began, flowers began to blossom. And a new episode of new possibilities came into being as regards the total destiny of the planet Earth. New possibilities for plant life and also for animal life and for human life and life of the human intelligence, new possibilities for religion, new symbolisms for art, new excitement of existence. All this became possible then. So we need celebrations that would celebrate these moments of grace, the moments of transition. And it's celebrations that give us that excitement with existence that supplies the energies that we need to satisfy ourselves to a degree in our a psychic or interior life that will enable us to withdraw from the destructive processes that we're involved in at the present time. To withdraw from these destructive processes is going to be a very severe process. Now, there's another source of psychic development is what may be called the great symbolisms of the past. We have the symbolism of the stories where innocence betrayed is rescued by the heroic endeavor of some of the major figures in the literature of the world. This provided an archetypal expression of the heroic deeds that humans are called to. We do heroic deeds in times of war. We do heroic deeds in protecting families. We do heroic deeds when a community is threatened. And now we are called to a heroic deed of a new dimension. Never before has there been such a need for heroism, what may be called the great work that's before us. And this, I think, of its nature, is capable of fascinating, capable of drawing forth the energies that are needed. So these would be some of the sources of the energy that we need.
When you think of say, young people who, in a certain sense, would be deeply activated by this kind of vision, what are some of the ways in which they are kept from hearing this? And I mean, in this sense, that it's that even if a young mind or an older mind is drawn away from the structural processes, there's a change of psychic structure almost is necessary to respond.
Well, I think they are kept away from it to some extent by the trivialization of contemporary life and the illusion of the great work that is associated with business. Their models become the great business or the great inventors or the great achievements in this order. But it's also the role of sports. Sports at the present time is tending to become a preoccupation and has become the ritual celebration of our times. Things like the Super Bowl, things like these contests, even the golf things that draw so many people. These activities tend to take on exaggerated dimensions in a society because they have no fulfillment in a more normal, creative way.
Thomas, this question of the heroism of our time, without question, it has to do with this great work. And in the past, as you say, this heroism would be activated in young people to go forth and to save or to protect innocence. But oftentimes that would be involved with war, and it's easy to get excited about a war. Do you have any thoughts on this challenge of making available to young people a sense of heroism with the great work? Does it have to do with somehow seeing in the particular the immensity of the whole in every particular task that's before? Or how do you think about that?
Well, I think of it in terms of the fact that the ideal of heroism has been stolen from our youth, in the sense that the heroic persons of our times are those that destroy the planet. The heroic people have drawn off into great business ventures and to inventions that dominate the planet and devastate. There's the difficulty of rethinking heroism that moves in the opposite direction, that moves toward the protection of natural systems over against the intrusion of the human system. Well, this is the great difficulty, is something that depends on people having an experience of the wonders and the preciousness of the natural world when they don't have experience of the natural world any longer. So it's getting increasingly difficult for people to know what they're missing. I sometimes say that I have to shake people, as it were, to stay awake. Know what you're losing. They don't know what they're losing. People don't see the stars. And if they talk about saving the great forests of the West, then it's on economic terms. Or you're going to keep people from doing their job, or you're going to keep the corporation from making money. Well, there are heroic people that will block this by standing in front of bulldozer or chaining themselves to some of these machines or doing heroic tasks of that nature. Greenpeace that does heroic tasks. The Sea Shepherd that puts themselves in between the whaling vessels and the whales or the sea mammals and protect that way. So we do have models of people that do this very dramatic work. It's been difficult, but many of them go to prison over this, and many of them really put their lives in the line.
And I see too, in a sense, when you talk about the other source of energy in terms of fear, as you're speaking, I begin to get a sense of how horrible the image would be that your mind is colonized. So that if you're a person and you have a sense of even your very ideals, your heroic ideals, those are false ideals. So that sense of it'd be something like an older idea of damnation or imprisonment.
Well, that's where the problem is, in the sense that the great work, say, of India, their great work was basically a work of transforming the human orientation toward transcendence. They had their heroic epic in the Mahabharata. They had their heroic story in the Ramayana, where Rama is dispossessed from the throne and wanders until he is able to come back and resume a proper rule over the people. And that story of Rama is the greatest epic, the greatest heroic story of Asia. It shows up in almost every country of Asia. Now, everybody has these heroic stories. Just like we have the Homeric stories, we have the Song of Roland, which celebrates the battle of Christians defending the European world against the invasion of the Muslim world up through Spain. So to get an idea of the heroic task is something new, and it has to be evoked by some type of an experience that people have. Now, take myself, for instance. It was evoked in me when I was quite young. And I don't know how it happened, but by the time I was 8, 9 years old, I saw the roads being paved. I saw the intrusions of the automobile. I saw the commercial spirit coming into North Carolina, into the small place where I was. And I immediately, as a child, reacted against the commercial spirit. the South had tried to reestablish itself after the Reconstruction, after the Civil War. It tried to do it as an agrarian society, but then this country developed this mystique after the Civil War. The last 30, 40 years of the 19th century is when this changed in this country, or at least took on the industrial mode. The urban life developed in the 90s, in the 1890s, when America became an urban society. And when the modern corporation developed, the modern industry, realism came in. The romanticism that was associated with the transcendentalist movement of the 19th century was considered trivial. You had to be a realist, and that's where we get the Sinclair Lewis novels about the realism of the business world. And you get some of the other writers at that time. You get Upton Sinclair, who wrote the critique of the jungle, of the livestock, of the meat industry in Chicago. And you also get the first monumental corporation in Standard Oil. And that had to be broken up. It became such a heavy controlling establishment that it had to be broken up by a court order. Is largely under the influence of Ida Tarbell, who wrote the story. Well, all this was happening, and when I was young, the South had decided that it had to move from an agrarian society to an industrial commercial world. And North Carolina decided that it was going to be the foremost state in the South in getting into the commercial world. So by the early 20s, be 1922, by the time I was 8 years old, somehow I began to feel this. And just something that I didn't like. I saw it was development, and I began to look for a way out of it. And so I didn't know quite what to do about it, but I knew that I had to think my way through, that it was something that would require a thought insight. It wasn't something that you could remedy immediately. So I started what might be called, everybody has a heroic way, my heroic way. And my heroic way was to get out of the total public life of the society at the time into a monastery where I could think through what was the urgency of my lifetime, what I could do that would give my life meaning, and that would have meaning not simply as regards myself. I wanted to serve a cause. And I identified the cause not simply a social cause, but I saw that the difficulty was deeper than the social cause. It had to do with the devastation that was taking place in the life systems of the continent. And so, in that sense, I had experiences, though I had experiences of woodland and streams and of the natural world. I don't know what people do that don't have experiences of that nature, and how they would feel the intimacy and feel the urgency of creating something. Now, I didn't have the least idea what would be the positive content. I knew what I didn't like. I didn't know how I could do anything else than save what needed to be saved, of birds. I saw the trouble that the birds were in, the streams, the meadows, and I saw a saving thing. But I didn't know or even begin to see the order of magnitude of what the whole thing was all about. So that would be my story. And I think something of that has to be the story of an age or of a people. I was to some extent amazed that it wasn't more widespread in my generation. I was amazed that the people would go into the commercial world, so that by the time of the 40s and 50s, but I did know that I had to find out what happened to the whole human venture and how humans had found meaning, how they had related to the planet Earth, how the planet Earth has survived the human presence up until then. So that was my study of history. So I had to learn the historical process up to my time and how my activity would fit in the human historical process and into the larger destinies of the planet. And so by the time of the late 30s into the 40s, I studied history, and then I knew I had to go to China, I had to go to Asia, I had to get some sense of what was happening there, but always with this sense of a rethinking of the human venture at its most basic level. And I didn't really come to that until somewhat late in life, in the 60s, when I really, it was Teilhard de Chardin who got me beyond the religious answers. Well, you just become a religious person somehow. From him, I learned one of the most important things is that there's a spirit dimension to the universe from the beginning, and everything has a spirit dimension, a psychic spirit dimension. And that was, in a certain sense, I had never fully understood that before, nor had I fully understood that the evolutionary story and the human story were a single story. So that, and then he got me out better than I'd ever gotten out of the redemption mode of religion into a creation mode of religion, so that I could begin to think through the meaning of the world on its own basis and the evolutionary sequence. And then I began to see that if we were going to do anything, we had to work out of an understanding of the evolutionary sequence, and that would have to supply the dynamic. But a person had to understand how precious that was imperiled, and that would require more than the heroism that you need in war, the heroism that you need in doing any of the traditional things. It required a certain type of dedication that people like John Muir find it in people like Wallace Stegner. We find it in some of the people like David Brower, particularly, and the other Edward Abbey. These are people that began to see how things are. And then Robinson Jeffers, the poet, who gave expression to this, he had the most powerful expression in poetry probably of any American poet. So that it is in some of the poetry, it is particularly in John Muir, so that a person can get entry into this through people, some of the literature, through Muir, Jeffers, David Brower, these particularly, and then there are some of the others that escape my mind right now, but there are a fair number of people that are doing this heroic type of work.
It almost seems as if the mind has to be opened up to embrace a much larger arena of concern before we can begin to respond at the level of heroism that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Because Teilhard seemed to have provided for you, among others, but Teilhard provided a way of seeing the human and the universe as an integral reality, which enabled you to overcome the discontinuity which was taught between the human and the natural world.
Yeah. But the difficulty is almost a total reversal of values. That's the real difficulty, because it's not the bad people that are doing the damage, but the good people. So our whole structure of ideals has to be changed. Formerly, the heroism was in accord with the ideals of the society. If a person moved into the proper direction, like take the Christian ages, the ideal of the martyr, the idea of the heroic missionary, or what, that was all there. And a person could follow out the ideals of goodness. The difficulty is that coming to America, when the Europeans came to this country, they assumed the ideal of occupying this country and the mission of exploiting this country. That was their ideal, and that was for the benefit of the entire human community, for our benefit, the benefit of others. So it wasn't simply for their own benefit, although it was a mixed effort, so to speak. But that idea of manifest destiny, we assume manifest destiny. That was the thing to do. To heroic was to conquer the North American continent, to go out and take possession, to overcome the animals, to overcome the hardship, to conquer the desert, to climb the mountains, and all of that. And then later, the heroic people that put the railroads across the continent, all that assumed heroic dimensions. But it was all devastating. And the religious ideal of the conquering religiously, that was an ideal that was already distorted. So you had the religious ideals distorted, you had the commercial ideals distorted, and all these under the guise of doing heroic goodness.
But would you say that the ideals themselves were flawed from the beginning, or that the human species over this period of development went through a change, and so the ideals, formerly good ideals, now became destructive ideals?
I think that the ideals in their archetypal structure were basically good and had their good manifestations, but that they became distorted, became pathological. Like take the Spanish conquest of South America. It was a distorted thing to move in on these poor Indians and to conquer them, suppress them, and all that. That was a distorted religious ideal.